Hi, this is Shep Altshuler, publisher of TimeSharing Today. Welcome to this broadcast of TimeSharing Today Radio, featuring news and views of owners and industry professionals. Today, we will be discussing a controversial timeshare bill that is rapidly winding its way through both houses of the Florida legislature and its potential impact on owners, multi-site developers, and legacy resorts. George Leopsky, TimeSharing Today's editor, will be the moderator during the interview with Gregory Crist, CEO of the National Timeshare Owners Association, and Jeff Weir, chief correspondent for RedWeek.com. Comments expressed during the broadcast are those of our guest and not TimeSharing Today. So let's join George Leopsky.
Good day, everybody. This is George Leopsky, and I am joined by these two august experts in timeshare legislation. We are talking about the Florida timeshare bill that is pending in the legislature as we speak. It is House Bill 453, sponsored by Senator Eric Eisnagel, who is from the Orlando area, and Senate Bill 932, which is sponsored by Senator Kelly Stargell. She is from Lakeland, which is a community next door to the Orlando area, and her district extends into Orange County as well. They have introduced legislation that has created quite a tizzy in Tallahassee. Jeff, can you tell us what the legislation is all about?
Yes, I'd be happy to, and thank you for having me today. This bill ostensibly is an attempt to streamline and modernize and update timeshare legislation that went back to the mid-1980s. And understandably, the timeshare industry has changed a lot since then. And according to the sponsors of the bill, this really just updates language in the existing law so that it reflects what's happening in the marketplace. There are other people that will disagree with that point of view, I am sure. But bottom line, the bill has several major components. Most of them are developer-oriented. I'll touch on 3 or 4 of them and then let Greg have his input on it. But the first issue, and probably the most controversial, is language that says if a disclosure violation is called non-material or supposedly not important, that would not give rise to an owner's ability to cancel a contract after purchase. And disclosure is a hot button in the industry for both owners and developers alike. Developers want a streamlined disclosure, and owners want more disclosure. This bill basically says developers will not be held liable for mistakes in contracts if those mistakes are, quote, non-material. The reason it's controversial is no one has defined the phrase non-material yet, and there are many lawyers that say non-material automatically is the kind of word that leads to further litigation down the line. So there's a disclosure component to this that's controversial. There is a second, potentially as controversial, fee increase in this. It's not intended to be a fee increase, but it allows fee increases on owners to happen. The current Florida law puts a cap of 125% on an annual increase in maintenance fees for owners. This bill supposedly tries to deal with the fact that Florida has hurricanes and other one-time weather events that create major damage, and so the development community is seeking a waiver of the 125% cap to deal with what they call hurricanes and also property taxes that may be imposed by jurisdictions just as a revenue raiser. So the development community is saying in extreme circumstances where you have major damage at multi-sites or standalone resorts, you can go beyond the 125% cap to deal with those extreme situations. Owners, meanwhile, may object to that completely because it's very possible that you could have an owner in Site A paying for an emergency repair at Site B. And that is a contentious part of the bill. The third part of the bill is directly related to legacy resorts. And it's an interesting component, as many people who follow the industry know. Right now, legacy resorts many times don't have a provision to either extend their association plan or to extinguish it if they have that desire. Or they may have language that says you've got to have 100% of your voting owners approve such an extension or termination. This bill says if you get 60% of the owners, you can change the association plan, you can end it, or you can extend it. And interestingly enough, when ARDA proposed this bill, the original language in the bill said all you needed was 50% plus one of owners to do these changes. The legislature was a little concerned about that, so they raised the number to 60. In a practical matter, 60 may be too many. Since getting 60% of all the owners in an association to do anything may be like herding cats. But at least it's a starting point. And with that, I'll invite Greg to chime in, since there are many components of what I've just mentioned I'm sure he is concerned about.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you outlining the bill as you did. I can tell you that the NTOA's position is that we do not believe this bill as amended is clearly written. It's generally confusing to consumers, and this is going to significantly reduce consumer protection mechanisms that are built in place. The NTOA feels the required disclosures that are currently in the Timeshare Act are quite important. They were put in with intent. We have very serious concerns as to some of the ambiguity and the vagueness that will be expanded from simply one section to 60-plus sections in the entire chapter. You've touched on some of that already. We're seeking to find the definition of what substantial compliance would be, and we need to understand what is material and what is not material. We don't believe that the Florida legislature understood what the GBPR was stating when they said, these are documents that are required for compliance. So we're concerned as to the posturing of the bill. It is clearly one-sided, as it is a developer-sponsored bill. The third element of the bill regarding legacy resorts is something we do not have an issue with. However, again, I'll repeat that the vagueness or ambiguity of the language in this bill is clearly confusing and needs to be clarified.
To whom does this bill apply? You could have developers in Florida with resorts elsewhere. You could have developers elsewhere with resorts in Florida. And you could have Florida residents who are owners of timeshares, who buy timeshares in Florida or somewhere else. Who does this bill affect?
It affects owners and developers who have a multi-site timeshare plan. And that could be, a great example of that would be Diamond with their collection that has many different timeshare resorts built into a collection as opposed to one budget. That really is basically what it comes down to.
Jeff, does this bill also apply to timeshares that are not deeded, like points clubs, so that maintenance, quote-unquote, is not a relevant term, but only the number of points required to trade?
Well, it's a good point, because the original statute 30 years ago did not even envision points or vacation clubs or multi-sites or trusts. So that's part of the reason that, it may be long overdue to have an update of a 30-year-old timeshare law. But bottom line is that the developers are contending that everything that's going on in the marketplace today is legal according to existing law, even though none of those issues are addressed specifically in the Timeshare Act. What ARDA claims it is trying to do is provide specific language in the updated bill that addresses current market practices, which deals with points, trusts, vacation clubs, multi-sites. So the differentiation in the original law, that is the statute today, deals with deeds and weeks. The amended statute's going to be very permissive on allowing a lot of new business practices for clubs, trusts, multi-site, multiple ownerships, but it's going to have the same impact of affecting deeds owners and or point owners, regardless of when they bought into the system or how long they've been in it.
I'll follow up on that a little bit. The NTOA certainly recognizes that the bill needs to be modernized to take into consideration the new business models that have come into the industry. We certainly don't challenge that whatsoever. What we do challenge is, again, that the bill is not clear in its language. Consumers need to be able to understand and differentiate what is being offered. A timeshare today is not what a timeshare was yesterday. And so we need to have better clarification on that on the books.
Would that involve clarifying the difference between points and deeds. Some points clubs actually give the buyer a deed, but it may be for an interval that is physically located elsewhere than where they're vacationing. How would the legislation treat that?
I'm not sure that that's exceptionally clear, and that's a problem because we're going through multiple jurisdictions, and we believe that this law will be a model for other states to consider to implement. That's why it's so important that we get this model clear and defined so that other states can follow a good, clear model as well.
Jeff, do you want to comment on that question?
Well, I do want to amplify a little bit, and that is that, to my knowledge, most timeshare entities are all vectoring as fast as they can to point programs and vacation clubs and trusts, where people buy into a blind trust, and frankly, they never know what they're really getting by buying into that trust. And the development community obviously wants to codify the trust model as being not only good and okay, but legal. And I think that's a big motivation behind this bill, because there are many clauses in this bill that talk specifically about allowing trusts to do various activities. And as we all know, there were no trusts 15 years ago. It's a new business model that's being ratified by this legislation. And I think, as Greg alluded to, the devil's going to be in the details and how these things get implemented on the street and various resorts by different companies. And if you give them all a lot of latitude and flexibility, you are probably inviting some companies to do bad things. But having said all that, I'll withhold judgment until that happens.
But we've been talking about developers and points and vacation clubs. How does this apply to the legacy resorts, the older self-managed resorts where the developer's long gone and the owners or an independent management company hired by the board of directors is managing and operating the resort and determining the annual assessments? Does this law have any impact on those older existing legacy resorts? Greg?
We believe in the shadow that, the developers who are in active sales that operate a fee-for-service management system, we're hearing from our owners about these programs where associations have entered into agreements with the management companies that reacquire inventory that is in default. And we see some problems associated with that because they're acquiring access and control to seats on boards, which could ultimately end up being a fully controlled entity by that developer. So we're looking at those scenarios and how that would play into the revisions of this law. But clearly there are some concerns as to how that would play out. And again, as Jeff said, that we'll see how those details play out after this bill passes.
Well, what's the potential impact on owners of all of this? Greg?
Increased maintenance fees. Increased maintenance fees would certainly be one of them. Change in service could be another. There is clearly discrimination to buyers in the secondary market. We see elimination of owner beneficiary rights, and the list goes on and on. So again, if we could have some clarifications to this bill, we could certainly eliminate some of the potential problems that it poses.
Jeff?
Well, since I have done a lot of work with redweek.com, which is sort of a transactional site for owners and buyers and renters to exchange timeshares, I'm well aware that there are millions of timeshare owners out there trying to sell their timeshares. And that's a looming, growing issue within the industry. In the development community, well aware of all that, since these are their original customers that are now trying to divest themselves of their timeshares. The development community, as demonstrated by this bill, is still 100% focused on retail. And this bill, again, is trying to codify current retail practices to get people to buy more high-end timeshares in points or vacation clubs that developers, can reap the biggest benefit from. So I think you have the contrast of the development community in Florida still going gung-ho for finding new ways to make retail very profitable, while at the same time you have a growing segment of the timeshare world that needs an exit strategy and is turning to websites like Red Week, where they can talk to their owners about buying or selling or renting. And they're going there because the original development teams that set all these things in motion do not have any resale programs of any major extent, and they are forcing owners to go elsewhere when they get to that point in life where they need to, divest themselves of their timeshare. So this bill just codifies the focus of the retail world.
Or if they do have such programs, they are not competitive. They may take something back for a very modest percentage on the dollar.
Well, and that's exactly that's a horrible little reality for a long-time timeshare owner to realize that their $20 or $30 or $40,000 investment is now worth a couple $1,000s or $5 or $10. But that's the way it goes for every owner.
Jeff, what's the significance of raising the cap on maintenance fees for multi-site timeshares, which is in the bill, versus single-site timeshares? Do the legacy resorts get impacted by this at all?
Well, the fact is the legacy resorts have to deal with their maintenance fee problems through special assessments right now. So if you have a hurricane in Hawaii or something, the association members there generally will pay 100% of the loss in a one-year special assessment, and those are always tricky because owners are not used to a whopping one-year fee. When you get into multi-sites, you enter into a fuzzy realm where you can have owners in Florida paying for damages in California. And development community leaders that I've talked to don't like to admit that, but they acknowledge it happens. And that's why if you're in a vacation club or in a trust or just in a point system, you're paying maintenance fees based upon the total fee structure for everyone in that point system, and ostensibly it's a lower maintenance fee, but in reality you pay more on average in a point system for your maintenance fee than you would if you had a deeded week. So the bottom line is in Florida right now, legacy companies have to pay their assessments right now and live within the 125% cap. Multi-sites have that restriction as well, but they're using the hurricane and the threat of hurricanes or property taxes as a one-year, one-time exemption on that annual raise in fees in order to do special repairs. Now, I think when people do that in practice, we'll see whether they're doing it for the proper purposes. But the reality is I haven't seen any language in the bill that says you can only use this on timeshares in Florida. And if it doesn't say that, it means you can use these fee increases on other timeshares where you may have emergencies too.
Outside of Florida?
Yeah, I don't see any language in the bill that says this only applies to entities that are 100% based in Florida. And as you know, if you're an owner in a trust that has properties all over the world, you're paying a maintenance fee based upon the average cost of all those resorts combined. You're not paying the cost of one resort where you own. And so it's a different model. And I know the timeshare companies promote that as a wonderful thing, so that if you're living in Hawaii, where I've vacationed at hurricane-prone places, you don't get stuck with a whopping one-year bill for hurricane repair. That cost gets spread across everybody in the group that includes the Hawaiian resorts. So developers like to bring that up as a way to save you money, but the fact is, with most timeshares in the United States located in Florida, that's where all these things really are hitting the street in a real way every year.
Greg, will other states follow Florida's lead if this bill passes?
Well, it's very typical that other states follow Florida's model because Florida is the timeshare capital of the world. It's easier for a working model that has been in place to be replicated in other states. We've seen that with transfer litigation that the timeshare industry has put into practice. NTOA has supported ARDA in that area, to protect consumers. So we do see that replication of a timeshare act comes directly out of Florida.
Jeff?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable. If something is tried and does well in Florida, they'll try to migrate it to other states that have maybe similar situations. but I don't think it's automatic, and that's because the state legislatures that have timeshares now are not all expert on timeshares by any stretch, and some of them, like California, are heavy duty into consumer protections. And I think, having covered the California legislature for many years, if someone said a bill passed in Florida, California legislators would say, so what? They would say, prove it. And I think Arizona would have a different attitude, and Arizona's would be, if the federal government likes it, we hate it. So I think you're going to have different attitudes about consumer protections in different states. In timeshare, those are going to impact the ease with which ARDA can migrate some of these provisions. Again, I think they're going to try to push the legality of this as far as they can, because that's the new business model. But I know that's also going to be tested at some point. But in fact, there's always testing grounds for these kind of bills. And right now, Florida is not only the testing ground, but it's the nuclear proving ground because of the breadth of the industry in Florida.
Jeff, timeshare companies have donated thousands of dollars to Florida legislative campaigns. Should this be a concern, and if so, why?
Well, I think it's a concern for the obvious reason. Greg's owner-oriented association is not spending $500,000 in Florida. And the only reason money matters in politics is that it buys you access. So the money that ARDA, the American Resort Development Association, has spent in Florida, which is about $500,000 over the last year, and they spread it across many legislators, including $5,000 to Icnagel, who's got his own PAC for political purposes. The Republican Party received more than $300,000, which is no surprise since the development community is a stalwart GOP pro-business entity. And the state Democrats, who need timeshares and vacations and hospitality benefits as much as anybody else, they received $150,000. So the development community is doing a good job of sprinkling fairy gold dust in the terms of campaign money on all the legislators that it could even conceivably want to talk to. So it guarantees when they show up for an appointment, they get it, and it means the staff will take their concerns seriously. And in a case like this bill, I guarantee you the Florida legislative staffers, who are probably young legal advocates and very well-meaning and dedicated, they did not dream up this Timeshare Act bill that's being promoted today. That bill was 100% dreamed up by legal firms affiliated with ARDA and their major timeshare-branded companies, and no owners were consulted, period. So we need to get realistic. The reason campaign money is focused on so frequently, the truth is this money guarantees a conversation, and that conversation creates education among the lawmakers so that someone along the way says, hell, I think this is a great idea. I'd be happy to sponsor your bill. If Greg's timeshare owner advocacy group had the means to spend as much money as ARDA in Florida, we'd be having a much more robust debate in the legislature about the terms of these bills. Right now, it's a one-way, fast track. There's one engineer, and it is ARDA, and the bills are going through committees with very little opposition. There's only one law group that has formally testified in opposition to these bills, and that's a group that likes to represent owners in litigation where they'll sue development companies to cancel contracts for failure to properly disclose terms of the contract. So the reality is this bill is sailing forward to a quick conclusion. It'll probably be passed by May 1st and go into effect on July 1st, and then we'll see what the devil in the details might really be over the next couple of years.
Is it unstoppable, Greg? What action should concerned listeners take?
I think Jeff really summarized the political scenario very, very well. We're really down to a last straw scenario where we need to probably form a petition to send to the governor to ask that he veto this bill. I can tell you that a bill in New Jersey last year that passed both the House and the Senate was vetoed, clearly vetoed by Governor Chris Christie as a result of his concerns over consumer protection. We would like to think that Governor Scott would be fair and equitable and hear our concerns and address them by vetoing this. It would give us more time to sit down and hammer out a good bill with ARDA, as opposed to a bill that is vague and is not clear in its mission. We would certainly like to partner with other organizations and obviously consumers who feel that they may have some very serious problems, as we do. So a petition is likely going to be formed. We're very early in that process, but it's late in the game, so we have to get moving on this very quickly now.
As we have this conversation, we're early in April. The legislative session ends at the end of April. So the question is, as we are at the halfway point or very close to it, what's the current status of this measure as of today, and what has changed, and what is likely to change, and where is it going?
This is Jeff. I can tell you right now, these bills are on the House and Senate floors awaiting full passage. And the way the Florida legislature works, when it passes one House, it then has to go to a second House for approval. And since there's a Senate bill and a House bill concurrently on this legislation, at some point there has to be a conference committee where they iron out the differences in the two bills and then resubmit them to both houses for approval. I think that will happen relatively easily because there are not a lot of discrepancies between the bills. There's one minor discrepancy which is sort of humorous, and I'll take 30 seconds to describe it. One of the provisions ARDA wanted to update as part of this bill was to get rid of a duplicative $2 per timeshare owner tax on all timeshare owners in Florida. Under the current law, it's a possibility that an individual owner who had a timeshare at a legacy resort and then bought somewhere else would actually pay a double tax every year, and it would pay $4 or $6 or $8 a head. So the original legislation in one house basically said we're going to eliminate this duplication and save owners $2 a head per year. The Florida legislature looked at that and said, well, that sounds harmless, but then they looked at the fiscal implications and found out that the eliminating the unnecessary and unfair extra $2 tax would create a $400,000 annual revenue loss. And the Florida legislature, like many state legislatures, is groping for every dollar it can. And in this particular case, this elimination of the extra fee was eliminated from the bill because the legislature doesn't want to lose that $400,000. And so one bill has that $400 deficit in it. The other bill does not. That's an area where they'll iron out the differences. But the beauty of that tax is the $2 a head tax now supposedly is used by the state of Florida to regulate the timeshare industry. And you can imagine if you eliminate the money for regulation, you're eliminating regulation. And so as a timeshare owner myself and one who works with people at Red Week on owner issues, I can imagine some owners advocating a $50 per owner tax to increase regulation, particularly in a state like Florida, which has been the home ground and ground zero for every timeshare scam known to man. But in any case, that's one little minor example of differences between the bills, but the major issues have already been resolved in the various committees, and so the bills are now really just waiting for the up or down full vote, and then somewhere along the way the governor's going to have to deal with this as either a minor update with his signature on it or something he has issues with.
So the focus now should be on trying to influence the governor.
I think that's right, but I would also, if I were an advocate, I would go on record voicing the same concerns simultaneously to all the legislators who've already voted for this in committee, just to let them know people are watching.
I want to follow up on what Jeff just said. And the NTOA has been meeting with legislators and senators regarding this bill. We were on the Hill yesterday testifying at the Senate Judiciary Committee, expressed our concerns to the committee. That did pass favorably yesterday with several dissenting and voting no. However, it did pass. And again, as Jeff clearly stated, this is on a fast track. It is going to go to the governor because it's going to get voted through both the House and the Senate. Some of those steps are right now a letter writing campaign, a petition to hopefully have the governor look at this and say, you know what, why don't we go back and address some of these concerns, clear up the language, make this accessible for consumers to understand, and carry this forward and be a good model for other states to follow.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Greg, if people want to be in touch with you to express their views on this legislation, how do they go about it? How do they communicate with you?
Certainly. They can contact us via phone, 727-502-6877. My direct extension is 1004. They can also contact me by email, and I'll give you my email address is greg@ntoassoc.com. That's greg@ntoassoc.com. You can also see our Twitter feed at NTOASSOC. We are actively posting tweets on Twitter right now regarding the bill. And again, we would love to hear from timeshare owners and understand some of their concerns. We've already received a significant amount of inquiries, and we have shared much of the consumer sentiment with elected officials in Florida.
And Jeff?
I appreciate your having me on your program, and if anyone needs to contact me, I am at jeff@redweek.com.
Thanks to both of you for joining us today.
And this concludes this broadcast of TimeSharing Today Radio. You know, whether you're an owner or an industry professional, your opinions, suggestions, and experiences are all very important to us. So if you'd like to participate in a future broadcast, or if you'd like to suggest a topic for TimeSharing Today Radio, please send an email to staff@tstoday.com. So until next time, happy